Hello and welcome everyone to the first talk of the day at the Design Lab space. We're very excited to have everybody here. Sophie and Chris already pretty much explained everything, but if you have any questions, just come up and ask me or ask anybody with a silver wristband. Bless you. We are here to help. I'm Katie. I work for SupplyFrame / Hackaday. And I am going to be introducing Bil Herd. He is a self-taught hardware engineer. He has been with Hackaday video producing for several years now. So he's actually been with the part of the family. He's actually been with the organization longer than I have, which is great. He's an instrumentation designer, is that right?
I do that.
Yeah, you do that on occasion. And he's best known for designing the Commodore 128, a successor to the Commodore 64. I'm really excited about this talk. Bill is awesome, like I said, part of the family. And let's give a round of applause for Bill.
I'm on. So there's still time. Let's all go sneak over and watch Alan Yates and then sneak back and say we had a great time. That was me shouting in the back at the other place. My apologies. So, and I'm actually using some Apple technology here, so this is like having no self-esteem that I have to rely on the competition. So, my name's Bil Herd, as I said, or as she said. I didn't say it yet, but now I have. And I call myself a recovering Commodore engineer. It was an exciting time, but it takes its toll on you. And making videos for Hackaday is kind of one of the therapies that kind of bring me back to reality, even though it's been 30 years. So one of the things I want to do, the theme here is creating hardware. And so I wanted to, put in my proposal to talk about what it was like to create a home computer. And in this case, we had 5 months to do it. We had a CES show coming in January, and it was August when we said, hey, let's start this thing. So it's anybody here know Commodore? Have y'all heard of it at least once? It's okay if you haven't. We're gone, right? We're no longer around. Apple won. Doesn't mean I have to like Apple. In fact, you're going to hear me slam them a little bit. Let's keep it between ourselves, okay? So, we went through the stages of, hang on, I'm trying to use two technologies here, and for an old brain like this, it just doesn't work well. As you may know, though, with Apple, we had the highest selling home computer ever. It was Commodore 64. We did 27 million of them. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records. So again, when you hear, all these days I see like shows about the 80s. And they talk about, and they show apples, right? They're okay, they did a lot. But we sold 27 million, and they were using our chips. We were a chip fab in addition to being a computer company. So yeah, I got a little bit of high horse about the chip thing, and I want to share that with you because it's actually pretty cool, a lot of the stuff we were doing. But we did spiral out of control. Jack Tramiel, our founder, left, and a couple things happened. The company just kind of had no direction which to go. Marketing became just like you see in Dilbert, right? Just togas, They killed the last unicorn, Chuck Peddle's unicorn, the guy who did 6502. And, so you've heard the 4 stages of death. What are they? Anger, denial, vandalism. We do this all the time. Anybody ever do this to a Commodore logo? We call it chicken lips, by the way. It's our secret little. But, eventually the other stages catch in. Acceptance. So I had somebody say, I can't unsee that image anymore. So I want to talk about the 80s, though, right? Who here was alive in the 80s? Yeah, give me the 80s, who? Different time. We all still thought digital watches were pretty clever. And Douglas Adams was still around alive to write a book, right? You can't go backwards in time. I could go hear Pink Floyd play Dark Side of the Moon, or The Wall, live, right? And we didn't call long hair mullets, ever. I don't even think I heard the word. And if you had said it to me, we'd be talking, right? We used TV sets to show the computer. And I told somebody, yeah, we put the computer on TV. What, on top? No, we displayed it. That's how we displayed the actual computer image. But we were trying to get people more used to things like monitors. There's a Commodore 64 if you don't know what one looks like. And we even did something like this. Who's seen this? Anybody ever see one of these? Oh, cool. Isn't that cool? Yeah. Apple have something like that? Not color. See, I've gotten way ahead of my Apple device here. So when I got to Commodore, it's like walking into a pachinko parlor. You hear boop, 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 boop coming from all these offices, right? Everybody's playing video games, and about half the people playing them were even supposed to be playing them. I have no idea what's going on. Oh. See, I'm getting way ahead of the technology. 80s. What's this? Everybody know what that is today? That's a wafer. Let's see if I can do the same pose. That's our wafer. That's a wafer from the 1980s. It's a 5-inch thing. So you can imagine, and we used to fling these like Frisbees. I mean, you know, talk about having a chip fab downstairs, right? As a matter of fact, you can, there's a flat edge along this, and if you do it right, you can cleave it and make things like this. So what we do is we tell the beginners, here, go cleave this, put on the edge of something to hit it. Glass everywhere, right? I'd be shaking it out of my long hair for like 3 hours afterwards. So when I got to Commodore, it was the coolest place to work. You'd walk by and see people looking through microscopes at chips, right? I learned not to walk up and bang into that desk while they're doing that. You know, it's like meerkats where they'll turn and look at you because you just ruined all morning's worth of work. One time, they were looking at a chip through a microscope, and they turned on the light to put it into NTSC mode and turn it off. The chip was broken. They couldn't write to it, but they used the photons. And I'm like, did you just use the light to change the state on the cell? And I go, yeah. I go, oh, I'm such in the right place. This is where I want to work. But there was something wrong, too. There was this subliminal fear. So I was working there when Jack Tramiel was still there, but things were getting a little dicey. But I was just a kid. I was 24, and I knew kind of instinctively that we couldn't be afraid of making mistakes. We're not going to get the, can I curse in here? We're all friends, right? We're not going to get this shit done. Oh, wait till later, I'm really going to curse. We're not going to get this shit done if we're afraid to fail. And there was this finger-pointing thing going on when I got there. So one of the things I said is, I'm going to make mistakes. In fact, if I'm doing my job right, I'm going to go fast enough. I have to be making mistakes. So one of the things I did is I wanted my enemies to help me find my mistakes, right? Because I'd rather do that than put something into production and have millions of the mistake come back and keep slapping me for the rest of my life. I have people slap me for things I actually liked, I thought were good, let alone the bad things, but I didn't want that coming back. So those of you that know me know I speak of Commodore as a Greek tragedy in 3 acts. So I'm from the second act. I'm from the C64 is done, and Jack Tramiel's on his way out. His last day was the day after this, and I actually did those 2 computers that are in his hand, and you know, so the act 2 is as Jack leaves, but before the Amiga, right? And we had a computer called TED, and TED is Commodore's swing and a miss. I mean, you know, I take some credit for doing the 128, but I also did the worst line ever done by Commodore, and it didn't have to be that way. What had happened was Jack Tramiel had said, I want a business machine. I want a Sinclair killer. Timex Sinclair was now. We'd already done the Apple. We killed Apple with the C64, in our humble opinions. So now we're going for the business market. That little thing there is supposed to be $49. That's a Raspberry Pi these days, except it's got a case, keyboard, and everything, right? So, but with Jack Tramiel gone, marketing got confused. Then they confused us. They're like, it's not a Commodore 64. Didn't say it was. We know how to sell a Commodore 64. Do you, or is it selling itself? These are the arguments we had. So marketing then, Here's another version. It's half of this one, but 2/3 the price. That makes sense, right? Then there's this one. Oh, by the way, one of them talked, the 364. We absconded with the guys from TI Speak and Spell, and we had a talking computer in 1984. And it was supposed to be a desktop where you could talk to the desktop, move things around, drop them in the trash. Sound familiar? Apple didn't invent it in 86 or 7. You know, we had it too. But it's just, you know, it's in the trash pile. Eventually, we do this. Does that look like a Commodore 64? Yeah. So they're happy, nobody else is. I had somebody just wrote me an email about 3 days ago, and he said, oh, in such and such a year, I got a C16, and he's like, what the fuck? You know, as he said, it was his worst Christmas. Next year, he gets a 128, and it was his best computer. So I said, I was responsible for his worst and his best Christmas. So, but that's so now, the thing that happens because of all this, all those machines, I signed off on them all. Suddenly, the most prolific system, excuse me, the most prolific systems designer at Commodore is a 24-haired, long-haired partying kid with an attitude. But it's like, now I'm their cash cow, right? Because I at least know how to get stuff done. So our next computer, before Jack Trammell had left, he had left us a gift. We owned an LCD fabrication plant. We were the only American producers of LCD glass, we called it. Everything else came from literally one plant in Japan, except ours. It was called Eagle Picture. And so we had an LCD computer in the works. And this is why I started in after the TED series. We actually got it done. I have one of the 3 of these in my basement. It was supposed to be evolutionary. It made sense. We did the game market. We flopped on the business. Now LCD. Alas, Commodore's mismanagement. One of the things that happened was the president of Tandy. Everybody remember the LCD computer that Tandy had at the time? It sucked. It was that little golden blue, you squinted. But the president of Tandy told our then president of Commodore that there's no money in portable computers. He's our competitor. What are you doing listening to him? But he did, right? So I'll jump to that, but this is what I started on next. And let me see what I'm supposed to talk about when there's a blank screen. All right, so I was working on this, and I had given it away to a guy named Jeff Porter, went on to become the vice president of engineering. And there was a chance to work on something that had to be done in 5 months. Well, when you're a kid, you know, you always throw down the gauntlet, right? 5 months, that sounds more exciting than an evolutionary thing that will take a year. But the main thing was the guy did know what he was doing that was working on it. And there was a design going on. Yeah, they overlap. We had this thing called a B series or a P series or a D series. And it's something where computers went to die at Commodore. We had B128s, D128, D50, 256. Anybody, are they familiar with any of the Bs or Ps or Ds? Well, that's about right, yeah, because who knows? I mean, they were elegantly designed and everything, but what the main thing was, there was a design slot, resources allocated to producing one of these, and the guy that was working on it was screwing up really. He wasn't screwing up. He just didn't have what it took to really do good at Commodore. And so I looked at the programmer that's on it. He looked at me. His name is Fred Bowen, and he's actually one of the famous people at Commodore for the software side. And we said, let's get together. Let's do something. But if we're going to do it, that thing I just showed you had a 6509, 6809, made by Motorola. Well, wait a minute. We're Commodore. We own MOS technology. We're the creators of the 6502. Which the Apple uses. Everybody but Tandy used it, right? It's like, well, let's do something with the 6502 instead. We'd gotten the 6502. This is cool. You can see how a processor works in here. This is really cool if you actually track it down. And you can actually go to the schematic then and find each gate of this. But what had happened was a guy named Chuck Peddle and Charlie Winterbowl, Bill Mensch, a couple other guys, they were at Motorola, and they had developed a microprocessor there. By micro, we meant it fit on a chip. Well, Motorola hated that. Motorola was charging $20,000 for a PC, for a processor board. And he literally got a cease and desist internally. Stop making your microprocessor, you're cutting into profits. He took that to mean, him, me, and Chuck Peddle, that he had permission to leave and take the intellectual property with him. Now, Motorola's lawyers didn't agree with that. He got his own, and what Chuck, I remember Chuck said, he said, I've been thrown out of better places than Motorola. So he brought the 6502. It actually started with 6501, but there's a 6801, so we ended up with the 6502. And again, we're a chip fab place, right? This is like the layout of the O2, and at one time I actually knew where all the, which the different sections were. But one of the things that was cool, I was hanging out with the manufacturing engineers were wondering why we were drawing so much heat. And this is all hand laid out back then, right? They would cut ruby lith and expose it and make photographic negatives and then reduce them and things. And then you could be a brilliant IC designer, but it mattered how well you went in and checked how those ruby lith layers had all overlapped and everything. Very, very tedious. Well, one of the things that got through was the chip was using a little too much power, and they laid, you remember mood rings from the 80s, right? Those crystals that, they laid a crystal on this that's made to do it, and they found a hot spot, and one of the things they found was just a 200 ohm resistor from VCC to ground, right? And he finds it with a mood ring, so very 80s in that. So when you hear me talk about MOS, that's where I was originally hired, was MOS. I was on the second floor above a chip fab. And this is actually a picture out of the omnibus from 2 years ago. And I just saw the Atari Game Over. Anybody seen that documentary? When the guy's walking up to the old Atari building, he's like, oh. Well, that's the way I am when I see this building, right? But there's one thing here, is because we were a chip fab, you didn't park on the downwind side because we had ruined the water table, and under FDA, or FDA, whoever, EPA regulations, they're aerating it to get it out of the ground. Well, you ruin your paint job on your car over here if you parked on this side of the building, so you'll never see. I mean, it took me like 3 weeks to get the crap off from my first day working there. Now, one time I said something about the 6502. And the lead designer said, yeah, we got that here. What? He said, it's here, it's 6502. And what are you talking about? He goes to the dustiest, lowest drawer on one of those big drawing drawers, and he opens it. I can hear it in my mind still. And the lights dim. And there's chanting, right? This is my memory at least, and I'm burnt out, okay? There's incense. I think we're purifying the air. And he pulls out the 6502 handwritten schematic. I swear, it's written on parchment, right? They even make the blue lines on parchment. So it was like just, oh my God. And you would find where they didn't even know what to call the pins. Each pin didn't have, there was one that had CPS, meant Chuck Peddle Special. The guy next to me is laughing his ass off. They found me later out in my car crying, right? I'm like, it was beautiful. Because it was a religious experience. It was the 6502. That's how I got started as an engineer. So it was they do also have pictures of me licking a Cray 1 somewhere out there. So still can taste it, right? So I asked Chuck Peddle one time, and we did an interview with him with a young lady named Jerry Ellsworth and myself. And we asked him a question about the 6502. I'm like, Chuck, the Terminator. At 6502, the first time I saw a Terminator in the 80s, I suddenly, you know how when you relax, you're enjoying yourself and you get on your own HUD, you start getting code development going and stuff. And it's like I'm reading the code as it flashes by as he's about to shoot the dog and stuff. And so Terminator, evil, right? Bender, right? He's okay unless he's doing the kill all humans thing. So I asked Peddle, I said, are you like an evil genius bent on world destruction? What's going on, man? Guy didn't miss a beat. He's father of microprocessors, why would he? He goes, well, if you look at all the equipment in the hospitals And you know, I mean, we didn't count microwaves and all that, but hospitals and life care and stuff. I'm like, so what your point is, you've saved more lives than you've taken. And he's like, yeah. So that's how he, you know, comes to terms with, you know, all the destruction he's caused. Now, at some point, we needed our own 6502 for what we were about to do. We needed a pin bonded out. And true to nature, remember I said we got to go fast enough that we make mistakes? Boy, we made one. We had what's called a bonding diagram, where you take the die and you literally, you know, decide which wires go from the die to the pins. And back then, we didn't have computers. What we had was a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. So we went to the photocopier to make one more generation of it. And of course, by this time, it's all grainy and crooked. And standing at the photocopier, I can still see it, we went, yeah, let's pin it out like this. Well, we should have pinned it out like this, you know, 140, 150, but we went like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we ran around like that. The wires, it's physically impossible to do that. Somebody at the room where they bond these, they were hand bonders. You look in this room, you see a whole table full of little old ladies with microscopes, and they're hand soldering chip bond wires. They had to go and turn this thing 45-degree angle to make the wires match. We called this the tie tack, right? So yay, Herd's got his own 6502, and it's fucked up. It was actually kind of cool, though, because we could run the logic analyzer and whatnot. So now we're off to a great start. Not only am I using the chip that started my career, I even have my own version, even though it's screwed up. So if we're going to use the 6502 and we're going to advance things, we needed more memory. So we need a memory management unit. Anybody familiar with them? They bank stuff. They move stuff around. But it'd have to be a custom chip. Well, good. We do chip fab. We have our own custom chip thing. So I'm like, all right, let's start. We need an MMU. Well, I told you about the LCD computer I'd worked on. I had been doing the MMU in it, so I just lifted up the design and took it out. I'm like, good, I'm done with it, you know, or not done, but I've got my MMU design. This was almost the first MMU in a home computer, but I missed a bit called the supervisor bit. So we didn't care about being in the record books. We just wanted to get this stuff done. But the problem with doing custom chips, we've got 5 months to get done. Well, I can't wait for a custom chip to be done for the programmers to start. So for every chip we did, we had to do an emulator board. So we would design the chip twice, right? The chip designers are working. I did this one. And this is what they look like on the bottom if you thought wire wrap was easy. And this is how we got our programmers. We're now down to 4 months to go. And we've got like an emulated MMU. We needed a PLA, programmable logic array. We had one in the C64. I mean, it's what glued everything together. It was also our highest chip failure. It was 30, 40% of them. You're nodding your head. You know about this, right? We didn't care. We called it getting it under your Christmas tree, right? If it failed after it was under your tree, we'll replace it, but we got it under your tree, didn't we? So that's literally was the Commodore. It was made it for the masses, not the classes. And we had this PLA. It turns out, years later, I find out they had too much boron in the silicon nitride passivation. Now, that sounds boring, but if you hung around chip guys, you'd all be like, oh, boron, oh, that's it? So, you know, because it would get this purple creeping crud. It'd get infected with moisture, and you could actually look under the microscope and watch a Commodore chip eat itself. So, but I needed one, so hopefully we had fixed enough of it. And the PLA was born. And of course, we have to emulate it. So we've got multiple other PLAs trying to string them all together to make the 140 pin. We had stolen, I don't want to short anything out here with water. We had stolen the PLA design. Now, stolen's the wrong word, lifted it. I know that because in the chip lab, we had a big piece of cardboard and we had Polaroids around the edge and then down where the bus drivers. We had been buying them from Signetics called the 82S100. And we don't like buying other people's chips to put in our computers, especially at our quantities. So they took a microscope, and they're still doing it these days. You know, you see all these people de-chipping and stuff. So we stole the PLA, and for our reward, it was our highest failing part. But we got one now, too. There's a VIC chip under here. You can't see it. Anybody know what the VIC chip is? You ever hear of the VIC chip? It is the most wonderful, it is the chip that made, obviously, the Commodore 64, but it was the game chip. 8 or 16 sprites, I forget how many. Everybody know what a sprite is? It's trademarked, we're not allowed to say sprite, it's a movable object block. Texas Instruments trademarked sprite. But a sprite was, you know, in the Atari before then, you had player missiles, too. You had one player, one missile, or 2 players, 2 missiles. Well, we've got these 16 sprites. We can move all over the screen without using the processor. And we get an interrupt when they overlap and stuff. So if you fire a missile and you just have a routine that moves it every timer and it hits, it'll tell you automatically and stuff. Wonderful, wonderful chip. It was also the most harshest bitch I've ever known. This thing would make the most beautiful colors and then screw the DRAM timings. I mean, royal. I mean, down in production, they're hanging capacitors off lines to get it shipped, so it'd be under your tree, even though that capacitor was like no good at, you know, once the thing warmed up. And we were actually not allowed to go down in production to find out what they were doing to get these units shipped. So the VIC chip was beautiful, but it had its issues. Here I had to emulate the next VIC chip. And I wanted to get DRAM timings right. Commodore 64s don't work, by the way. They look like they work. They give every appearance, right? On the average, they'll reboot every 20 minutes or so. But they did things like we'd get this light blue sparkle on a dark blue screen. You know, that was our screen, was light blue and dark blue. Well, the way they got rid of the sparkle was they made all of the cells that weren't turned on dark blue on dark blue. They're still sparkling, it's just you can't see it because it's dark blue on dark blue. I mean, those guys got paid like $2,000 for that idea. So here's RVIC, and I get to use delay lines. Well, not in real life. I can make a perfect signal with delay lines. They're $4 each. In cost $12 by the time I multiply it times 12. I end up doing 6 million units, so how many, you know, everything gets multiplied when you're at these mass quantities. So we didn't get to use like stuff that was actually useful. All right, 80 columns. There wasn't 80 columns at home, but we wanted you to try it. How about 80 columns? You want it? We'll give you 40 columns so you can still play Jumpman. But you want 80 columns? We'll get you, we'll hook you up. I was going to use the 6845, a venerable chip. Knew it cold, right? Like back of my hand. Well, it turns out Commodore had been working on the Zilog 9000. I think that's what we called it. It just hung on and hung on and hung on, whereas we're turning product every year. The business guys are on their 2nd or 3rd year of a 16-bit machine. We'd have been first if they turned it in a year. Well, they'd been working on this 80-column chip for over a year. And I remember when the head of chip design came to me, a guy named Bob Ola. He said, hey, we're trying to find a home for the 80-column chip because it's doomed. We're never going to finish the Z8000 computer. Would you like to use this? And I like the idea, right? It's a Commodore MOS custom chip. So I look at the other designer who he had drug along with him. I'm like, well, is it a 6845 superset? And he goes, yeah. Later, I realized, after it's too late, that he didn't understand the question. Unfortunately, and this is a mistake I made, I should have been anal. I should have torn that design apart like I do other, but I figured the Z8000 people had already vetted it. They've been trying to use it for a year. Sure, I'll use it. The biggest mistake I made. We almost didn't make CS because of that. So here's our new computer. It's going to have an MMU, a programmable logic array, the VIC chip Mark II or whatever, a microprocessor 6502. It needs a new font ROM, needs 80 column. And the computer, like I said, that I'd signed on for was called a D128. It had a 6509, funky banking, which meant, I don't even want to describe it, it would make my brain hurt. Had a, you know, they were looking at the VIC-2, and there was no code base, because who does 6509? So I stuck in a 6502. I added an MMU with actual windowing, like we use today. I added an 80-column color. And we said, well, we're doing all this other shit. Let's make it C64 compatible. Highest selling computer in the world. Who wouldn't, right? It's like having your brother be one of the Walter Paytons or something, you know? Eli or something. Let's add the SID chip, best sound chip at the time. Yes. Yeah, did you lose your fingers? I see you went like that. It's like, yeah, SID chip cost me that finger, all right? So I got you beat. We found we could do things like double the clock speed. You've heard of Moore's Law, right? Everything doubles. Well, sure, let's do it ourselves here in 5 months, right? So we found a way to go twice the speed. We wanted a built-in floppy version because, you know, Commodore, you'd buy a cheap computer, right, for $200 and then buy a $300 floppy drive with it, right? And it was under your Christmas tree. And I wanted a reset circuit because I'm just that way, right? And you can't do anything in these quantities without like reinventing the wheel. So, this is the best job in the world for 2 weeks. Because for 2 weeks, every variable is up in the wall, up in the air. You can do whatever you want for a while. You picture it, you rotate it, you look under it, you think about it. But it has to start coming together, and the more decisions you make, the more constrained you are. But you're still doing it with your right brain, but at the end of the day, you use your left brain because you now have 3,000 math equations you have to solve for. And at quantities of 1 million, every single one has to work. If you blow it 5% of the time, 5% of 5 million is a lot, right? A lot of money. By the way, I made $24,000 a year when I did this. So they were getting their money out of me. So one of the things I did in my math is I realized that plugging in the Zilog CPM cartridge would draw too much power. The 600 milliamps or something would cost me $2, $1.50, something like that. Again, we're already getting used to the math, right? Times 5 million times. So I said, well, let's put a Z80 in it. So remember how he's going, oh, 6502 made by Commodore. Oh, now I'm whoring myself out. Oh, all right, let's grab a Zilog Z80 and stick it in there too, even though we didn't make it, because we already got one we made. So now we're looking at the first I don't know first, but first big, 8-bit dual processor system. And this would come to haunt me, but it would also come and save my tail end. So with 4 months to go, about 3.5 months to go, this is what a prototype system looked like. You can barely see it because of all the emulators under here. Actually, this was in a Hackaday article, this picture. And I don't know what management thought. This is what it looked like. You know, we're 3.5 months out. And the board looks like this, and there's only 3 of them that are working. And the designer is, you know, this guy. Can you imagine what they thought when this is your designer? And the board looks like that. But nobody said, are you not going to get done? I mean, you know, what would you say? Yeah, I am. And again, this came back to, I was the guy that had done last X number of computers for him. So we're off to the races. VIC chip drops, right? By drops, I mean pops out of the oven first. And I'd gotten to the guy in time and said, when you do a rev of the VIC chip, I need a Z80 clock, unlike anything else. Everybody know what CMOS is? What's the C stand for? Complementary. It pulls high and it pulls low equally. What's NMOS? It means negative, right, or something. Well, NMOS is good at pulling low, and it sucks at pulling high. It goes to 4 volts, and then it kind of just peters out. And it didn't work. They tried to make a Z80 clock for me using that very special spec. So this is the first kludge I had to go in, where I just threw my own self, I don't want to say integrity, but the problem is when you go to 5 volts using 5 volts, you'll always get that tail, right? We're all engineers, right? So I stuck 12 volts in the base of a transistor and hooked it to 5 volts. Well, 12 volts goes wham! I'm like, you got to 5, didn't you? Quick. And the transistor would flip polarity and go, ah! And it will hold at 5 volts. But it's backwards. It's a common emitter circuit in a configuration I've never seen. And I'm scared to death because I'm going to make $1 million. I had no other way. I mean, and by the way, we fixed a problem before the next sunrise every day. whatever the problem was the day before, to stay on schedule, we had to fix overnight. So the next morning, sun comes up, and this is what I have. Don't worry about how it works, just know there's 12 volts in there, right? I walked around to chip designers. I walked around to the fabricators. I talked to the guys that know how the bond wire sticks to the silicon, because I was afraid it'd crack, under a stress that I've never even figured out. I'm afraid these things are going to, what if after 1 million, the next 1 million transistors don't work right? Because I'm using it totally illegally. What if after 1,000 hours it stops working? I'm picturing people's Commodore 128s on airplanes and they start blowing up like today's, we didn't have on it. I still get an ear bleed, blood actually out of the ear when I look at this circuit. Who puts 12 volts in a logic, right? But we had to fix one thing a day. So then the 80-column chip drops, and it's got a problem. It was supposed to be an 80-column chip, but it only had 79. The left column, you'd see a little bit of flicker in there. That was it. And we're like looking at the designer going, now you told us you were fixing things, not making them worse. See, here's the thing. Chips, we get to have our own chips. If you can think of what you want in a computer, you tell the chip guy this is what you'll get. Then you pay for it with skin for the rest of your life, and you live with the problems the chips bring you. And this guy brought me this problem. I said, what'd you do to it? Well, right in the middle of this mad dash to CES, he decides he wants to cut the power consumption. So he puts what's called a back bias generator in it. The back bias generators make the substrate negative, so it pinches off harder. But if you're familiar with RC curves, right, the further a voltage has to go, the slower it is. So right in the middle of this, he screws with us, and here's how I fixed it. See that little metal tab there? That's connected to the substrate. I grounded his little stupid generator out, and the chip started working. We're back on track. I fixed that one in an hour. He shows up and he's pissed. What are you doing to my chip? Fixing it. Go away. Go make it work again. And it went on and on with that chip. Now, sometime during this period, QA, we figured it'd be good to have a QA department in engineering. And engineers, man, if we had a blind spot while designing it, we're going to have a blind spot while testing it. So we need somebody, preferably enemies. Sure, you can be in my enemy if you want, if you're productive. Otherwise, I'll fire you as in my enemy and make you my friend. But they declared war. They didn't do it in a helpful way. The QA manager all but got on a chair and said, "It shall not work." Okay, thanks. Well, so anytime anything happened, instead of going, it's good we found this, here's how we're going to plan for a fix, he'd go, I told you it wouldn't work. And he'd dance around. Well, I had an understanding with a QA department in the basement. And, I said, give me a heads up. One day the phone rings. He goes, they're on their way up. Okay, now I know what's coming, right? I grab a sandwich. The movie Dirty Harry was out. You remember that scene where he's eating a sandwich after shooting the cars? So I could show up in the hallway with my sandwich. And they're carrying it like a frickin' torch. They have this cartridge. The 128 doesn't work. And I remember I got in front of the guy and I stopped him. He wants to run around. He wants to do at least a couple victory laps before and I stop him right in the hallway and I take it from his hand. It's my computer. It's my problem. And he's like, so now I've got it, right? I've got the sandwich in my other hand. And I go and I plug it in. And it's Koala Paint. And what happens is, this is the login screen, right? It actually ran, it'd come up with this, and then it would start to paint the K red, and then the O red, and the A red. And see when it gets to the I? It missed the dot on the I. And it would take 2 minutes to paint everything red because it had missed the dot on the I. We had moved the dot on the I. We thought it was in the wrong place on the Commodore 64. And so we had cleaned up the font. It turns out you can't even move the dot on the I and be compatible with the Commodore 64. So that's all it was. He's like, and I'm like, I start laughing. They hate it when you laugh. They're like, I have your career-ending thing here, and I'm laughing at it, right? An hour later, we've got a Commodore 64 font ROM. It's called dead bugging. We got a Commodore 64 font ROM just stuck right on top of another one with two wires. One, I had a signal. It was one for 64 mode and one for 128 mode. I barely finished my sandwich by the time we're done fixing it, right? So we did need a new font ROM. So boom, we're on our way to CS. Throw the font ROM down the road again. So, and then they'll try and get me fired over the font ROM. Remind me to tell you that if I forget. So then the Commodore Magic Voice people show up, the original bus pirate. These guys are cool. I told you, PI speak and spell, right? Do you? And it was in a movie, E.T. Yeah? Dr. Richard Wiggins did that. Everybody's like, oh, Dr. Wiggins. I'm like, hey, Richie, let's get drunk. Yeah. So what this did was, unlike our other cartridges, which had a solder, you would solder a jumper if you wanted to be a game cartridge. Well, this thing plugged in, he said, I'm not here. You're not? Now just draw on power. Okay, let's go for the reset vector then. I'm here! Right as you reached for FFFC, if you know your 6502, he slammed the bus. He said, that's me. He did it dynamically. I'll tell you where to go. I'll save you now. Problem was, he didn't know anything about how to start up a C128. He knows how to start a C64. Plus, it's a Commodore product, right? I can't go, they don't know what they're doing. By the way, I couldn't do that to any cartridge. There was no such thing as somebody showing up with this crazily designed cartridge. I saw somebody take a glitch on the read-write line to latch D0 or something. Well, I can't tell them not to. There's no rules. So I had to put the glitches back in the Commodore 128. So to fix this, and again, we're going to do it overnight, right? Stay on schedule. I thought of everything I could do before I did the next thing, and that was the Z8000, or the Z80. Remember we shoved that sucker in there just to save some power? He starts at a different address, 0000. His reset line's high, the 6502 is low, I stuck an inverter in there, now the Z80 turns on first. He goes, I'll just go get some memory. Well, this guy, he doesn't do anything down here. Z80 starts up. I called the guy who did our Z80 for the CPM, but he wasn't home, but his wife was. And I said, do you know Z80 codes? She says, well, I know, I guess it's 8008 used the same opcodes. So, okay, tell me the codes to do this. And I read her the thing. She read me the code back over the phone. This is like 8 o'clock at night. And I go over and I punch it into an EEPROM burner. The next morning when they walked in, the Z80 started first, said, I have frickin' cartridges out there, oh man, and it starts setting up for Commodore 64 mode and goes, here you go. So the Z80 just saved my life, right? And oh, by the way, when I stuck the Z80 in, I didn't tell management I had done it till after the boards were in. And then, you make it sound like his idea. Well, dual OS, man, dual processor. And you see him running off to telemarketing. So we found that while we were doing this, the way to do what we wanted to do was to just do it, right? Jack Tramiel was gone. There were no directions from up on top. So this Commodore 128's the first computer, the only computer I knew of there, where a kid takes a piece of paper and says, this is what we want to do. And the whole secret was to do it faster than management. They didn't even know we decided to call it the C128. They were still walking around calling it the D128. He goes, C128, that sounds twice the C64. And he runs off to telemarketing. So that's how, so we literally, as long as we kept going, and they're behind us by 10 minutes, we're doing okay. So we ended up with the Z80, and then at this point we decided there's a Commodore key. When you press that, the Z80 says, well, I'm putting you in the mode, so now I can work with every Commodore 64 cartridge all in one stroke. So that was a good day. Here's the next day, though. Again, fix something every day. In the 1980s, a Michelob bottle looked like this. What's that? Yeah. I should go get a case just to see if they still taste the same. So the VIC chip drops again, and it goes back in time. an old problem came up. Now again, we like moving forwards. Now we're down to 2.5 months, right? And Dave Diore, who's my best friend, which worked out well because he's doing the chip and I'm doing the computer, and he stared at, this is what this shit looks like under a microscope. I mean, you'd make sense of it. It's hard for me to make sense of it. I'm supposedly know what some of that is. That's also from a Hackaday video. I mean, you recognize that one, Mike? So it's a, oh, by the way, since Mike's here, hang on a second. It's here somewhere. Ah. So as you all know, I do videos for Hackaday, and Mike's giving me the sign that I'm late on mine, so wait a second. This is Bil Herd, and this is the Hackaday SuperCon. All right. All right, shout like the newest iPhone just dropped, and it has the exact same features. All right, shout as if the Commodore 64 64-bit version just came out. Oh, come on! All right, I'll get you some kind of video out of that, Mike. All right, so what the heck was I talking about? So Dave's at the bar, and suddenly, and we're having beers, and he develops the picture he had taken while looking through the microscope, and he realized that one of the layers was wrong. So it's like his brain developed the picture that his eyes had seen during the day, and it's like the 12th time beer helped us get through a night. So we knew I was wrong. We had saved half the lot. It's called a 1, 2, 3. We keep the bottom layers. And we call over to MOS and say, stop! Take the first 3 layers. We'll send you a 4, 5, 6. Do it again. So we didn't even lose any time on this one. But we got drunk that night. What's that mean, 10 minutes or 10 seconds? Okay. I think I'm almost done. So remember I said I wanted a reset circuit? Turns out, in Commodore didn't have reset circuits. You power cycled your thing, right? So something simple like a reset circuit, there's a thing called a DMA. Everybody know what DMA is? Yeah, you fired something off, it's doing it for you, and when you reset the computer, and if it's still doing it, and it's not listening to you. So what happens is like 1 out of 20 times we wouldn't reset right. Well, at 5 million, 1 out of 20 times, this X number. So during this time also, when we're done with the PC board we've been working on for CS, we have 1 month to make changes to it, and then it's going to mass production. So I'm not allowed to move any chips, I'm not allowed to add any chips because I've already submitted to FCC and I'm not even done. The rule is I can move traces and I can add transistors. That's the only thing I can do. So we end up like making a latch out of existing garbage. If you do the logic on this will give you another ear bleed, right? But that's actually a latching circuit done with garbage on the board. I think we did this one by like 9 in the morning one day. Then we get our PC boards back. We're at T-minus 1.5 months in the CES show. And we have to make like 40 of these things for the CES booth. And 20% don't start CPM. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong problem. We'll get to that. All of them do this. This is worse. It'd be running along and go blah, right? That's not what that screen is supposed to look like in case you're not a Commodore person. And it's like, okay, look, it's a memory corruption. When you say 0, I'm going to ignore you, okay? Just we'll still be friends, but so the thing about a memory corruption is here's a VIC chip on a bus, here's a Z80 on a bus, they share the signals, here's a 6502, sharing the signals with the ROM, shared signals. They're jumping on and off, the DRAMs are going, well, give me some, give me the rest, I've got it. Anything in that can corrupt the DRAM. It's the scariest thing. I don't remember being scared, but now it's the scariest thing that can happen to you because you don't know when the corruption occurred. You only know, it's like somebody threw a bunch of crap in the road, and an hour later you hit it and you get a flat tire. Well, the problem isn't that you hit it. The problem is the crap in the road an hour earlier. One of the things I noticed was that there would be an @ sign at that one spot, most often, not every time. And so what we're doing is we're using the video display as a logic analyzer. The processor doesn't come along for another 100 milliseconds and trip over the bad memory, but within 1 scan time of that @ sign getting there, we knew it. So I took a light pin. I circled where it should be. Actually, I took this light pin, this 30-year-old light pin. I held this light pin up against that, triggered an analyzer that triggered another one, and it saw the corruption well before the processor. So it's the first time we'd used one of these to fix something. We traced it to a trace on the board about 1/8 of an inch long, where when you wrote 11111110, the ground bounce would make it into 11111, right? So we fixed that in enough time. I mean, we were able to put a jumper on there. But this is the kind of thing that when I go for my final PC board, if it does this, we're screwed, right? So another fix, that was a couple hours. Now, we're almost to CES. Maybe I'll make your time. And, you know, CES was everything, Consumer Electronics Show. The 8563 shows up, and it's broken worse. We can't load the font ROM in it. We can't do anything. The best way to describe what this designer was doing is if he had his own clock, and he didn't care about my clock, and he didn't try and synchronize it. Well, if you've ever tried to walk through revolving doors with a whole bunch of boxes in your hands, and you're not watching the state of the door, you know, you could end up, you get through, but some of the boxes are behind you. Worst case, the boxes end up over there, and you're still here on your ass looking. Well, that's what it was called. It's bad synchronization. And he said, well, it turns out if it could happen one time in 10 to the 24th, you know, it'll always happen. Well, he didn't even try and fix it. So we're 2 weeks out from the CS show, and he takes a vacation, which actually kind of, it's nice to not have him around because he wasn't helping a lot. I made a phase lock loop tower. I said, well, if the problem is your clock and my clock, and you didn't try and make up for the fact that they're different, I'm going to make them the same. Actually, here's one from 30 years ago. This cost us $1,200 to make. We got them in 8 hours. It's like, and the whole lab sat there, did nothing but listen to the radio. The guy courier we'd sent was on a motorcycle. And we're listening to the traffic report in case there's an accident on the 202 involving a motorcycle. So these things show up. What they are is good old phase lock loop circuitry, and I take the VIX clock and I make it into the 8563 clock, and this plugs in place of it. And then I left one wire off where I didn't wire it up, and I could move that wire to adjust it, like the dwell on your car. So and that's because I didn't know either, but I could find it, right? So going into CES, we pull one out of our ass. So meanwhile, another problem happens. Remember QA? They wanted to, so QA wanted to get me fired one day. I had done, we had a problem in the PLA. The PLA, when you held the listing, went all the way to the floor of that old green and white paper, and there was an X instead of a 1 in one place. I took the blame. It was my guys. I said, yeah, we did it. And the manager, the QA manager, and he's with the other QA manager, and they're sitting together. Something wrong. He goes, yeah, we have proof you made the mistake, and he pushes this little pile of papers on the table. I said, yeah, I fucked up. So here's how we're going to fix it. We're going to do 1, 2, 3. Remember 1, 2, 3s? And he goes, we have proof you've broken. I said, yes, I fucked up. Here's how we're going to fix it. He starts to open his mouth again, and the president of MOS, he didn't even clear his throat. He just did that little lean forward thing, and the whole room gets quiet. And he goes, I think Bill's got it in hand. And so that was, first attempt at getting me fired, right? So I won't even tell you about the other PLA. Well, I will real quick. So we're down to 2 weeks to go. The PLA that comes out from me making that mistake, it didn't work. Well, back bias generator, we talked about those. They had shorted all the pins down one side. They had moved it. So we ended up not moving it, but this is the kind of thing that we went through over and over again. Finally, pulling into Las Vegas, CES shows. We see billboards everywhere, right? We couldn't be happier. There's lies on there because marketing forgot to ask us what to do. Let's see if I can find you. 1980s, right? Can you tell just by the way people are dressed and stuff in there? We get to the CES show. By the way, this is how you act at a CES show. Here I'm pouring a beer on a floppy drive. Here a guy's holding a beer. We like Coors because out east you couldn't get Coors back in the 80s. He's trying to break a floppy drive with a beer. They're punting one. And this is a very dangerous programmer. That's Fred Bowen. You didn't want to corner him. We always try to leave him a way out. So I just want to show collegiate type stuff. We get there, and CP/M doesn't work with the new 80-column chip because nobody had told the CP/M guy about all the maniacal things he's doing. Turns out he was using 2 minutes left. I'll go real fast and you won't like it. He was using a hot air popcorn popper butter dish with an ice cube on it and putting it on his chip to make it work. The problem was it was old. He gets to the CES show and we explain to him that he's got to change his code. Well, he can't compile CP/M. He doesn't have all the computers that go with it. He sits in that chair right there and edits with the disk editor the code, which means he's hand calculating checksums. He does all of this stuff, and CP/M works the next day. So we're fixing it till the very last day. This is like a true programmer's programmer. You know, I'm a hardware guy, so you got to be a really good programmer. So he fixed CP/M the night of the show. Post CES. We have 1 month to go to production. You'll notice this wire right here. It doesn't do anything. If you lift it off and put a voltmeter or ohmmeter on there, there's still a wire. There's still a trace. What had happened, this is the production board. And, we didn't have the tools we do today. 20% of the time, CP/M would crash. That's a deal breaker again. I mean, just everything we worked for and not able to go to production. My boss and me were fighting because CES is over. After CES, by the way, the number of showers and suicides just increased dramatically. You'd find people wandering the halls, just not knowing what to do with themselves. So me and my boss are fighting, and the CP/M, and I said something, he said something, and he said, then you're off the thing. I said, good. I spent a week taking showers, taking naps, hanging out at the bar. It was the best week, right? Friday, he comes in, he goes, fix it or you're fired. Because the other engineer he put on top of it, he wasn't even close, didn't have a clue. I go in here with the scope, and I found it quick. I got lucky. When the Z80's running, there was a ghost on the wire. There was a reflection at just the wrong time. It's like when the 6502 did it, it worked fine. It's like blowing a flute from, like you're supposed to. But the Z80 is in a different place on the track, and it's like blowing a flute from the side, and it didn't work. All this wire does is connect the A10 line another way. Well, you can't get a reflection when, reflection goes down, comes down. It goes around and keeps going. So this is in every single C128 out there. It's this little wire. Sometimes it's red, sometimes it's white. And this is what we fought so hard for. We ended up doing close to $6 million, more than the Apple II. One of the things I got to do was design a keyboard, but I was in a hurry. Anybody recognize that keyboard? VT220? I looked down, I was working on, I like this, and so I made that the keyboard. Some other things happened. Then they told me about the Easter egg. They didn't tell me beforehand, because then they wouldn't have been able to bitch about not having enough ROM, right? Well, then take out the Easter egg. When they made this is how they found the font ROMs where the guy tried to get me fired and stuff. The QA department had never even tried all the letters. By the way, we shipped the Commodore 128. The Shift Q did not work because the QA department never even tried every key. When they did this, the way they knew the font ROM was wrong was when they did the V for Vaughn, it had a bar in it. So this got in there. This was supposed to be the computer, though. After I left, this got canceled. Oh, nice timing. But this had a built-in drive and everything, and this would have been cool. This is the computer I did like. And to this day, I get developers call me and say, my first computer was a C128D. We had the 80-column screen and the 40-column screen, and we had ROM monitors, so it was perfect for that. The other thing that happened was the LCD computer went away. Because our manager, being our president, used to be from US Steel, and he listened to the guy from Radio Shack that said there's no money in LCD computers. So, and since Commodore, like I said, I'm a recovering engineer. I ended up wandering the streets. I ended up in a trauma center, right, as a trauma technician, unloading the helicopter into it. I'd be like, you got any stress, man? Anything at all. I'm addicted to stress. I ended up doing ambulance calls and, all the kind of things that go along with it. But it's really sad what happened to Commodore. it's mismanagement. We were a great company. We were on our way to the Amiga, and it wasn't a deathlock between the Amiga and the Atari doing this multicolor thing, you know, it was just bad management. And so we're no longer around. You get to be Apple fans. I get to use one. But, you know, for me, working at Commodore was like working in Camelot, you know, and so that was my time. And so, you know, it's been my honor to talk to you all today about it. And as we say as recovering engineers, thanks for letting me share.